So who here came into this talk like knowing what the enterprise AI adoption gap is? Okay, one person at the very back. Who thinks they might know, but was not really confident enough or sure enough to raise your hand the first time? Okay, honest people, I see you. And then who here is like, I'm not really sure, but upstairs was a little easier to get to downstairs, so I'm just here. Okay, cool, awesome, that's fair too. Okay, so let me explain what it is, essentially. It's the delta between a set of expectations and reality in the marketplace, right? And this is honest to God, I've been to so many AI conferences, and I have not seen people brave enough to come out and talk about this topic, honestly. And so, but I think you cannot address what you are not willing to name, and so that's why I'm here today. Recent reports this year coming out of OpenAI and MIT, right? When you look at the consumer product for ChatGPT, only 30% of usage is applied to work. Obviously, that's only the consumer product, but if you look at that same report, the last time they did it, it was closer to 50-50. Therefore, in the consumer space, AI adoption is accelerating a lot faster and identifying more use cases than the enterprise space. That's the first thing. Second, 65 to 80% of Americans do not use AI at work. It is scary when we talk about AGI, and you guys heard about it this morning. 65% to 80% of Americans still do not use AI at work. Let me flip that statistic for you for a second. That means that only 20 to 35% of Americans are actually using AI at work. And that also includes people who might only be using it 5% of the time. That's crazy. If you're stock market invested, that's crazy, right? And then finally, I'm sure you all have seen the notorious and infamous MIT report that says only 5% of AI pilots are actually successful, which personally I don't think is necessarily a problem per se because pilots are supposed to fail. But that's kind of part of this big picture, right, that we're seeing. So, question for you all, why do you think this is actually happening? Any guesses? Yep. Okay, so enterprise is afraid of it. In what sense?
They don't want their employees leaking information.
Okay, don't want employees leaking information? Thank you.
Well, I think it's what you just said, is that they're measuring success as, here, use AI instead of what do you get out of it. I don't think that, I'm at a company where they're just focusing on this, but they're not telling you why it would help very well.
Okay, not a very strong business case or measuring the wrong sort of usage metrics instead of impact metrics.
It comes with a fee.
Sorry?
You have to pay for it.
It's expensive. That's a good one. Wow, you guys should be on the stage with me today. Okay.
Because to really get the best of AI, you need to really change fundamental things in your company.
Okay, such as?
Operations, strategy.
So changing operations strategy is a lot of things that need to be changed. Okay, there are more hands than I expected. So we're gonna do one more. Let's do one all the way at the back. Yep. I love this. See what happens when you're willing to talk about something honestly? Everyone else speaks up, right? I love it. So use cases are a bit hard to identify. I would add one more, which is actually the one that I hear the most, which is the tech isn't there yet, right? I'm sure you guys have all heard or seen that, or it hallucinates, et cetera. So I would say all of those are true, but we do not have time to cover all of them. And so I'm going to kind of pick on one that I see as something really interesting, right? So we're going to cover a lot of what you guys talked about today. But when I hear that the tech is not ready, the most common, that's personally the most common thing that I hear. This is something interesting that we noticed when we started to do research and have conversations within the Institute or AI Enablement Network, is you would see different kind of user personas or measured, let's say, by usage, right? So the sort of first persona is the folks who don't use AI a lot. Here's kind of a rough quote. I actually tried a variety of tools many times. It ends up costing me more time than it was worth. I see some nods in the audience. The whole thing is quite stressful to adopt, et cetera. The second person uses AI 65% of the time. I'm super excited about it. I've used it to write PRDs and actually drive real engineering product decisions. So That's a really big delta, actually, between two employees. And the crazy thing is, in these two cases, basically the same profile. Same company, same org, same role, same level of technical expertise. Access to the same tools, 50% usage delta. And we saw this time and time and time again across the different companies that we were talking to. Just imagine that. 50% delta scaled out across the employee base is significant untapped value in terms of AI adoption. And so yes, we can talk about, the tooling isn't ready, the organization structure is different, the incentives are structured, but this is under the exact same conditions we're seeing this degree of delta. And so that was a really interesting finding when we started delving into this problem space. And it begs a variety of questions, right? The first one is, what then is creating that delta, right? Like, what is making or breaking at an individual level, someone choosing to adopt AI or not adopt AI? Second, at a company level, if we can figure out exactly what is creating the delta, and we can actually engineer that so that we have a certain degree from a programmatic perspective of consistency in producing power adopters in the workplace. And finally, if we can figure out how to do that consistently within an organization, how do we make sure that all companies are doing that? So I put on my little investigator's hat and went on a fact-finding journey. This is over a decade of my life compressed into one slide, which, it's what happens, I guess. But at a high level, the specifics are not important. What I want to share with you all today is just the lens through which I personally am tackling this problem space, right? And the lens through which I'm personally tackling this problem space is a mix of having spent time in tech as a product manager, having spent time as a strategist working for Fortune 500 clients, including a lot of time spent in org development, employee experience, L&D as well. And then finally, some experience in journalism, so really thinking about messaging. And so that's the lens through which you'll see me tackle this problem today. So we went on a fact-finding journey. We reached out to the folks in our network and we said, hey, can we interview your employees and have conversations with you? We want to figure out what is the actual user journey of the individual employee trying to adopt AI. And this is what we found, right? So folks start off being like, hey, there's a Gen AI thing. That's kind of cool. They try it in a B2C sense, right? And they have wow, actually this thing created kind of like a fun little cartoon version of me, or it was able to help me do something in my personal life very rapidly. They're pretty excited about it. They're a little cautiously optimistic, right? They then hear about, hey, now I have access to Gen AI at work. Let's try it out. At this point, their expectations are actually pretty excited because they're expecting to unlock similar experiences and value add, right? Usually they try it once or twice. And then there comes the trough of disillusionment, right? Where essentially what we find is oftentimes folks find that, for quote unquote simple things, it didn't actually work the way that I expected it to, and therefore they're less likely to try the tool again. And this was something that is across a number of different interviews that we did time and time again we saw. So you might think, then we spoke to the executives, and their feedback to us was, oh man, these employees, they just don't got the resilience they need to try again and, stick with this. And there's a lot of, honestly, I would say, anecdotally, I've seen sort of the responsibility or blame put on employees for not being proactive enough with this. But the reality is a lot of people have day jobs, first of all, right? We're all very busy. And then second of all, when we went in and actually did interviews instead of just looking at these trends, we found that there was a lot more nuance to all of this. I'm sure some of these quotes and some of these emotions on the board are ones that either you yourself or some of your colleagues identify with when they think about using AI at work. Right? There's this weird mix of I'm afraid of it, but I want it to work, but I also can't quite figure it out. And I feel a lot of pressure, and sometimes I also feel a little bit misled. And so we went to just sort of investigate something interesting. And the interesting thing was that curve actually had one outlier. And it was the people who were the 65% power users did not face that curve. Instead, what they actually had was they tried the tool and had a really good experience with it, and then became a lot of times actually leaders or champions of AI within their organization. So what is actually happening? And what we identified for those folks who ended up being power adopters or power users is they experienced something called the AI aha moment, right? And this is borrowing upon a term that we see when it comes to general tech adoption, which is the first, when you think about a startup, right? Like the first major time to value for your tool. And I would actually argue that in the space of AI, a lot of times it's less about the first time they use a tool and it added a lot of value to them. It was the first time that they got the concept. There are so many things that are so darn confusing in AI. And there are so many things that are complete misnomers in AI. And a lot of the sort of friction that we noticed through our conversations was because some people got the concept and some people did not get the concept. I see a lot of nods. So I know I've struck a chord. And so it's a fun time for us to look at an actual very concrete example, right? Because when you go back to that curve, I talked about how one of the first times that people interface with AI is they try some general LLM tool at work, et cetera, right? That means that what makes or break your experience with that tool is oftentimes your ability to prompt, and therefore what you get out of it, right? And that then determines how much you're willing to try an agent, how much you're willing to try vibe coding, and all of those things in the domino, right? And so I noticed that, and this was earlier this year, so I'm sure a lot of employees are better at this now, but this piece of the presentation is digging into a little bit more of specifically my work at Microsoft now. So in designing in sort of reimagining how do we get more employees engaged with this topic, right, and crossing the chasm, I thought, well, if people aren't getting the experience that they want, but some people are, then therefore they must be prompting differently. So let's make sure that everyone knows how to prompt appropriately. You'll be surprised how many people think they know how to prompt but don't actually know how to prompt. Well, right? Why is that the case? Because I went online, and I'm sure you guys have all done this before, and searched for a prompt engineering course. And there is no lack of prompt engineering resources out there. There is no lack of prompt engineering resources out there. And this is me speaking on behalf of myself and not my employer. I think they all suck. I'm going to be totally honest with you. I really do think they all suck, right? If you developed any of these, I apologize. This is, just my point of view. You can come and pick a bone with me afterwards. But again, I want this to be an honest conversation, right? They all suck, but why? First of all, I love Andrew Ng. He's cool. He doesn't really know me or think I'm cool, I guess, yet. But I think he's cool. But I don't want to watch him talk for 2 hours monotone about, prompt engineering, right? And especially not if the format is presenting different techniques. Why are we teaching people techniques? If I walk away with a list of techniques, it's the equivalent of you gave me a basket full of fish. It teaches me nothing about how LLMs actually work, and therefore how I should reframe my thinking. And so we analyzed some of the top courses out there and realized there's a major, major issue with how we're teaching this stuff. So as an example, prompt engineering itself is a complete misnomer. As someone who worked in the product org, when I saw prompt engineering, it gave me the impression that there was a correct way to prompt, and that prompting was engineering. It was scientific, it was specific, it was about finding the right format. That is completely false. Why? Because LLMs are probabilistic. There's a bunch of different techniques you can use to try to get it better, so therefore there's no one defined path, and there's no such thing as the right answer. The second thing is techniques are not an adaptable way to solve prompting. I'll give you an example. So these are actual slides from the training that we ended up developing, completely revamping how we approach educating people on prompting. First of all, we called it prompt artistry, or the art of prompting, and that was a term that caught on across the company because it's a much more accurate way of thinking about this topic, right? Second of all, we started off with a simple exercise, right? Write a PRD for we're going to use ThinkSpace this time, so ThinkSpace branded AI device. That is one prompt. Or prompt B, I can talk about the role, the task, the goal, the problem statement, the constraints, and fill out a little form and put that in my prompt. It's much longer. You guys have probably seen the second type, right? They generate the same response. We started the presentation with calling that out. That one phrase, go out there and build a ThinkSpace branded AI device or whatever, versus a really long prompt generates the same response. Therefore, you're teaching me formats, you're teaching me techniques does not work, right? And so therefore, what actually works? What actually works is helping people understand that what LLMs are, how they work, the fact that they hallucinate, the fact that they have inconsistencies, but also that they have all these different dimensions you can tap into, really educating them on like the tech itself. And then therefore, when you face these different types of challenges, back into different type of techniques that you can go and find yourself to figure out how to do it. And hence, helping people understand it's less about the techniques they need to learn and more about their mindset and the way they approach leveraging these tools that needs to transform. Here are some of the outcomes. I can't share with you guys how many people took the course, how many people loved the course, et cetera, but we did have a really, really, really high satisfaction rating, and this course actually went viral within the company because not only did it get picked up by our own sort of organization, it also got picked up by other functions, and it even got picked up by sales enablement, which is like the #1 best possible outcome of a training is when the company is willing to pick this up to say, we're not going to use this to sell AI, right? And so a very different approach to something as simple as prompting. But the same concept of figuring out where are the misnomers, where are people getting stuck, and therefore where are the aha moments with everything in AI, from agents to prompting to vibe coding and so on and so forth, to developing a model. Had a fantastic conversation with someone who is a senior director of AI at a very large e-com company, and she shared with me the way that we think about how we measure success and do eval and do models on top of eval. Like all of that needs to change. The role of a product manager needs to change. You now need to help write evals, right? Like there's so much of these ahas that people need to have. In order to really get bought into the kind of AI piece. But we found that more and more of those people, once they had the aha, they were using the tool a lot more, and they even began to champion it and start to join the agent building team. And so if you're working at a company, or if you're trying to sell into a large enterprise, right? Like this is what you want to get to. You want to get to that time to value, aka the aha moment, as quickly as possible. So how do we predictably engineer that within an organization? I'm going to speak to it from two perspectives. There's a lot of things you can do, and a lot of things I'm sure you could glean from my previous the example that I gave you around how to sort of message, right, what you're presenting. But I went to a lot of conferences, and this was the #1 strategy for evangelizing AI within an enterprise that I heard. I'm going to have a champions program, or I have a champions program. Champions programs are great. I've designed them before, so I'm not going to shit on them. But they are honestly, I think they're lacking imagination. And they're lacking a degree of adaptability to what we really need to get people to actually use AI. The new stuff with AI is not just that the tech is new, it's the mindsets are new, and the way we approach rolling them out without an organization, the way we communicate, the way we structure our organization, someone mentioned that somewhere, all of that needs to change. I think you mentioned it. It was a really good point. So thank you for inspiring this conversation. And so I'll give you a simple example of like what a champion program essentially is and why it's problematic, right? It's better than having nothing, I will say that much. A champion program oftentimes is a hodgepodge of engineers, many of whom each sit within each team, and their job is to go and research the latest with AI, bring it back to the team, evangelize tools and training, et cetera, to the team. The problem is, if I have one of each champion sitting within each team, I have zero control over consistency, reliability, and quality of what they are actually doing. Unless it's their job, I cannot force them to say, you have to go keep up with these tools at this pace. You have to come back and figure out where the aha moments are. It took us 100+ hours to develop that prompt engineering course because we spent so much time studying exactly what needed to be reimagined, right? And so therefore, you don't have necessarily guarantee over that sort of critical thinking required to translate this new tech in a way that people is going to unlock value for them. And then finally, a lot of times it's hard to keep up with the pace of AI. So at my company, this is what we did. We essentially reverse engineered the average learner's brain, right? And so we thought, if we want to create consistency, we want to create quality, what is actually inside the brain of someone who's learning AI? And how do I put someone in a role to represent every single one of these pieces and put together essentially a little SWAT team that is responsible for AI enablement. And so these are the roles that we designed. A lot of these are net new. First of all, AI evolves really, really, really quickly. So instead of just having a general set of people who are responsible for championing this, et cetera, I have someone at the tip of the spear whose sole job is to every single week keep up with the trends in internal and external pieces. Peter laughed. Really useful because it's exhausting, right? But I found someone really passionate about this and does it naturally, and that's their sole job. And they send that out every single week across the organization, right? The person at the tip of the spear is also responsible for then bringing that back. So that's kind of the gather piece, right? If you think about a person's learning brain, what am I doing? I'm going out there, I'm researching all the information, I'm keeping up with it, I'm gathering it, I'm evaluating what I'm learning it, and I'm applying it, and then I'm building stuff and I'm measuring it. So we broke all of that out, right? This is my job. I'm the aha person. And so my job is to look at all those insights and say, what is the thing that people need to get in order to get this? Like, for example, prompting is not engineering, it's actually prompt artistry. AI agents is super confusing, super duper duper confusing. You know what's the hardest part about learning an agent? It has nothing to do with the tech. The hardest part about learning an agent is that people don't know how to translate what they do every single day into a workflow. I have no idea how to translate what I do every day into a workflow. You ask me to map that out, I'm gonna have to sit there for 2.5 days thinking it through because it's bizarre, it's automatic for us as humans, right? And so if you look at a lot of the solutions that are coming out, and I'm gonna name all of them so that this is not on anyone, right? Like Agent Kit, for example, from OpenAI recently, right? NAN, right? Copilot's got its own Copilot Studio Builder. The first interface is you go in and you're actually supposed to map out your workflow. I don't think of my job as these boxes with connectors and requirements and constraints. And so therefore, what we're actually building on our team, and as part of the Institute, is we're actually building a tool that sits before that, which is have a conversation with me, and I will create these visual maps for you that you can then go and take, and also a lot of different design options, because there's more than one way to map out a task, right? Design options that you can then go and map against Agent Kit or whatever tooling you're using or Copilot, et cetera, right? And so there's a lot of ahas that need to be happening, and you need to have someone in your organization that is curating those and applying that critical thinking to figure what those things are. Ideally, this person comes from the business already, so they understand product group's point of view. Then we've split up the actual execution and training pieces into a variety of different roles. So the first person puts together the kind of content or pre-reads, because there is a little bit of an educational component. They're also responsible for developing a lot of the tooling that we do. So we also are working on a tool that evaluates if someone's actually good at prompting or not, because a lot of times that's another gotcha. Most of our trainings are now all build-alongs, and so we have someone designing all the build-alongs who needs to be 2 steps ahead in terms of their knowledge and experience with the tool, like agents or whatever. And then we have someone who is redefining how we measure success, because we will talk about that on the next slide. But this is super duper duper important, and it's actually driving where AI is being applied. I'll give you a quick example as a teaser for the next slide. I read the MIT report kind of line by line and highlighted everything in it. You know what was really interesting? There are different degrees of application and adoption of AI across different industries. The #1 highest adoption space is sales and marketing. Do you want to guess why it's sales and marketing? That's a rhetorical question, but thank you, Chris. Well, I'll ask you a question later. I should cue better on that one. It's not actually because it generates the most value. It's because it's the easiest to measure impact. Let me say that one more time. The reason sales and marketing is the #1 space in which AI is being adopted currently is not because it's where it drives the most value. It's because it's where it's easiest to go tell your leadership, I drove impact. That's wild to me, right? That suggests to me that there is so much nuance and uncaptured value in enterprises with regards to AI usage today. Because instead of saying, I'm not gonna go and kind of apply AI in all these different spaces, right? Just because I can't measure it, why don't I just figure out new ways and better ways to measure things? Because the impact, the value is there. If I can see it on one person, I can scale that out across the organization, right? And so we'll talk about this shortly, but within our my team, I'm actually challenging the person who's responsible to this. I said, no one has figured out how to properly measure impact of AI. I want you to go solve that. If Anthropic can come out with like a 4D framework, et cetera, which has its strengths and weaknesses, you are not any less smart or any more smart than that person. You know your product space better. Go and figure this out, right? Because this is a blue ocean, y'all. And then finally, instead of having individuals build their own agents, we actually have a centralized team. This was a little inspired by Walmart. That goes, after we've gathered all the use cases through training and through them using all the tools that we're putting out, we then have a centralized team that actually builds the agents. And there's a kind of a cyclical cycle where the training and agent building works very well together. And so in terms of, and so now let's talk a little bit about this metrics piece, and this is the last thing that I'm going to talk about in terms of best practices within an organization. These are some of the, I spoke to some of the very large enterprises in the Enablement network, and the most common question I get from these sort of executives is, how do you measure success? Because it's on their heads, right? Like, they're responsible for defining why we should have this program and why it works. And they would reference like a lot of these really traditional ways of measuring outcomes of, honestly, an L&D program. I'm seeing people who are innovating in this space. Anthropic came out with the 4D framework, primarily targeted at academia. I think it's an okay start. I think that there's more that we can do. And here are some of the things that on my team I've challenged my staff to sort of brainstorm, right? So these are net new frameworks that we have not solved, but this is inspiration, right? So for example, if what we're essentially trying to get to is that 15% user to 65% user, and we identified that the biggest delta between them is that one is now really excited about AI and proactive about it, and the other one's a lot more passive, why not just measure that? Like, instead of having an entire rubric of measuring, how much do you use it, all these, why not measure sentiment? Not a lot of people are measuring sentiment towards AI as a metric. I think that's a missed opportunity because it's a really good shorthand for being able to quickly capture and profile employees. Creativity, right? So I talked to a major finance company or banking company, and they said, our goal now is not to just save time or effort. Our goal is to see if we can come up with better output. That's something that's kind of net new for a tool, right? And it's exciting about AI. It's like, it can save us time, but it could also produce better quality outcomes. How do you measure a more creative outcome? How do you measure a better quality outcome? That's a really interesting problem that we are going to solve, period, right? I'm not going to let go of that value add just because I haven't figured out how to measure it, right? And then the last piece is, we talk a lot about time saved, but I want to challenge you all to think about effort saved, right? How hard was this task, even if it was only going to take me an hour versus 3 hours to do? You saved me an hour, but did you save me an hour of really, really, really hard work, right? So effort here being like the combination of time x difficulty, right? And so a lot of really, really interesting opportunities to innovate in terms of how we think about measuring success. But this is really important if you're selling into enterprises as well, because like I said earlier, I'm hearing actual startups from top accelerators in the Seattle area tell me that the way I'm defining success is how much people use my tool. If I'm an executive and you're trying to sell into my company and you tell me that that's how much people are using your tool is why I should adopt your program, you're missing the mark. What you have done for me in terms of getting my employees excited and proactive becoming builders, effort saved, right? Not just usage, as well as unlocking real creativity. And these sort of business impact metrics are the things that I want to hear from you, right? And so, so far, I've been sharing with you, me plus my buddies in AI enablement and all of our takeaways. But one of the really powerful things that sort of accelerated a lot of this learning and a lot of this growth is that very early in my journey, I realized I can't be the only one. I cannot be the only person out there trying to figure out why someone is using a tool so much more than another person. How do I make sure that I tell a good story to leadership? How do I systematically roll out a program like this, right? And so therefore, I went out and started this institute in order to bring people together. And so this is a little plug. If folks, you guys are interested in getting involved in some way, there's a lot of different ways to get involved. I will share that with you shortly. But in conclusion, have we solved for AI at enterprise? Not yet, unfortunately. If that was your expectation this morning, I'm sorry to have failed you. But if your expectation was, hey, I'm going to be entertained for an hour and hopefully learn some kind of like, interesting things, I hope we've accomplished that. And so let's take it down to first principles. And I want to share with you guys some of the first principles things I want you guys to take away from everything that I share with you today, right? And it's really about mindset. This is the, not AI aha moment, but AI enablement person's aha moment, right? So the first one is ignore the typo. We're all human. That's the first takeaway. Second takeaway is so every one of us has the opportunity to come up with a unique way to tackle AI, right, in this problem space, especially around enterprise AI adoption. Everything that I shared with you draws upon my past experience as an org development consultant, as a product manager, and all of those things. This is my unique lens on the problem space. But you all have your unique lens on the problem space as well. And so therefore, think about where are the issues that you're seeing in the AI space and how can you uniquely tackle it. The second is, it's okay to slow down. In fact, it's actually smart to slow down. There is so much talk about, hey, we're going to get an AGI in 5 years, and the agent's going to do this, and then it's going to hallucinate, and then it's going to take over the world, and blah, blah. That might all be true. But if you think about something that's much more concrete, right, that's actually impacting, going back to it, stock market value, right, shareholder value, it's how much are people actually using this tool and what kind of outcomes are they getting out of it in a very concrete sense. And a lot of the things that you guys saw today was the result of slowing down and being really thoughtful about every tiny little step of the way. That prompt engineering training alone took over 100+ hours, right? The sort of design that we had for the organization took a lot of iterations and a lot of conversations with other folks, seeing how we can do things better. And so slowing down to be thoughtful about every single piece when you're selling enterprise or you're adopting AI within your organization is really, really meaningful. And then finally, we all have the ability to figure out what we want the future to look like. Because the thing I want to say is, when it came to developing models, data was the oil, right? Guess what? When it comes to adopting AI, you know what the new oil is? Use case. You know who owns the use case? You all. Right? We own the use case. Therefore, we get to put pen to paper and define what the workflows look like. We get to put pen to paper and define how we want these tools adopted, where we want them applied, and how we're going to tell leadership the story around how these things are being applied. So there's a lot of, when we slow down and be a little bit thoughtful about, there's a lot within our control, within our power. So finally, I hope you all learned something today. If you're excited and energized by this cause, I welcome you all to join me in a variety of different ways. So this is my LinkedIn. We are setting up our website, so this is the best way to get connected. Meanwhile, and we're looking for folks to partner across a variety of different ways. So if you sell AI into enterprise and you want access to our network or want to advertise with us or sponsor or be a partner, there's an opportunity to do that, obviously. For the AI exec network, that is something that is completely free, but we currently are capping it at enterprises with 5,000 employees or larger who want to be part of this. But if you are a little bit smaller than that, still reach out to me. We'll kind of gradually roll out to more and more folks as well. The monthly newsletter I just mentioned, we'll be sharing a lot of our takeaways and insights there as well as publishing a lot of the conversations we're having with AI researchers at the intersection of human and AI interactions. And then finally, if you're really passionate about this space and want to help volunteer, you're welcome to as well. So with all of that, thank you so much for joining me here today, and I'm open to questions.